So now we're going to be starting layering remote collar over the recall command. This part is recorded separately of your dog as it is the same information. So this is a template. It's going to give all the instructions, and then I will cut to the footage of your dog doing the reps. And if there's anything particular to your dog that you should know, I'll make a separate video for that as well, or a separate section for that in your board and train video. So recall is the most coordination heavy command that there is. It's also the one command that most clients tend to have difficulty transferring over. It's not as simple as we train the come and then we give the dog to the owner and then the owner says come and then the dog just runs to them. The dog has to tie the training, and in this case the remote collar, to the owner to kind of connect the dots for them to understand, oh, when you say the word come, it means now to go to you. Your dog has been trained with myself, with my staff, so the dog understands that all these commands are related to us, which is why we do these videos, these information videos, so that you can watch and understand. So when you pick up your dog, you're able to start reinforcing the training and then use your follow-ups to help close the gap on anything that you might be struggling with, any questions, or maybe some things that maybe the board and train program doesn't cover, okay? So for the recall, I like to use a 30-foot leash. This here is a 15-foot leash because of for long leash training and for the sake of this video, but I recommend a 30-foot leash when practicing recall for your dog. Anything less tends to be too short. Anything more tends to be too long. 30 feet is like the perfect range. And what I like to do is, depending on the hand, which hand you hold the remote in, so if you hold the remote in your right hand, you'd have the handle of your long leash over your right thumb, and then your remote would be here in your right hand, and the slack of the leash will be over the left hand, like this, okay? If you hold your remote in the left hand, we're gonna reverse this, and or swap this, you're gonna have this over your left thumb, remote in your left hand, and then leash here. That's usually how I recommend doing it. I've had some clients that like to hold like this and then do this too. The only issue with this is because you're feeding the leash through, sometimes the remote will get caught and then fall out your hand, but that's also an option. But what we're trying to do here is create a very clean way of handling our leash, because especially if you're handling a 30-foot leash, it can get quite messy. So this allows me, if the dog's at a distance of me, to take the leash and then just start getting that slack and throwing it on the ground away from me. What a lot of people tend to do is they'll try to collect the leash like this, and it's very slow. I've had people, smack themselves in the face with the leash. I had a client wrap her leg and then trip herself with the leash. So when we do it the way that I demonstrated and that I recommend, it keeps it very clean and gets it out the way as the dog is coming towards you, okay? We are not trying to reel in all of the leash. We're simply trying to shorten the length of the leash, which limits the range of motion that your dog has. So if we're working with the 30-foot leash and your dog is at the very end of it and they're running towards you and we leave it completely slack, sometimes dogs will bypass the owner and they'll keep going. So they have 30 feet coming to you and then 30 feet going the opposite way. That's a lot of momentum. Okay, the dog can take you down with that much momentum. So when we limit it, you might only limit 15 feet of slack, but now your dog only has that additional 15 feet of momentum as opposed to the full 30, okay? Limiting the leash also allows us to more quickly correct the dog. So as the dog is running towards you, you'll be moving backwards, away from the dog. They're coming to you, I shorten it. If they bypass me, I would turn to face the dog and start moving this way, and again continuing to shorten the leash, and I keep repeating this process each time the dog bypasses, and we're little by little shortening the leash which limits the range of motion, and makes it easier both for the dog and the handler to correct the situation to teach the dog to return to you. If you give your dog the full 30 feet of slack and you never shorten it, your dog will continuously have 30 feet of slack to go every which way, okay? And it makes it a lot more difficult to train the behavior. So when handling the leash, You're going to have the handle, of course, in your hand. Now, if when you're reeling in, the last thing that I recommend is once your dog has arrived or you feel like you've done enough of reeling in the leash, with the opposite hand, the one just holding the slack, you're going to go over the hand, over the finger, and then closed hand like this, okay? Over the hand, over the finger, closed hand like this. What this does is it acts like a lock. So in case your dog happens to bypass you and keep going, if you've locked your leash, they're not going to be able to rip that through your hand. I've had it happen where dogs will come to the owner and then take off on them, to chase a squirrel or something while we're training. So this helps kind of just secure the dog. If you're not ready, if you don't have that lock in place and your dog takes off on you, I don't recommend trying to hold the leash, okay? You're gonna let this go. You're gonna take the remote and remove it and then clasp down like this, okay? This is our fail safe. So here with the leash wrapped around our thumb, the dog, again, it also acts as a lock. The dog cannot rip that through your hand or through your thumb. So it secures the dog to you, so we're not worried about the dog running away. At the same time, we're preventing any kind of rope burn from trying to restrain the dog with the long leash, okay? So if your dog takes off on you and you are not locked in the opposite hand, just let that go, remove your remote, clasp down. You can brace yourself because the dog is going to be, there's going to be a little bit of a jolt when they hit the end of the slack, okay? So this does take some practice, so I recommend practicing these things without your dog first. Get used to just handling your leash, getting used to handling the long leash, and then put your dog on it, and then you'd go to the park and then practice, okay? So this is the most coordination heavy. It usually takes a few reps, but once you get it down in your muscle memory, it's pretty straightforward. One more thing would be when we're holding the leash, we want to make sure that we're holding it over the hand and not under the hand, okay? So you want it like this because that's what allows us to be very, very clean, very efficient there, okay? So when it comes to practicing the recall, I always recommend practicing in a realistic environment. We do not practice recall from stay. It is not realistic. It also will confuse the dog for stay because now the dog's going to think you put me in a stay and then you call me. So then they start to anticipate what's next, and the dog will start prematurely running towards you, which eliminates the purpose of the stay. So we never do a recall from a stationary position. We don't call from sit, we don't call from down, we don't call from place, we don't call from stay, okay? Now, if the dog chose to sit on their own, like if your dog is playing and away from you and they choose to sit on their own and then you call them, that would be okay because they chose to sit, you didn't tell them to sit. We're just trying to avoid calling the dog after we have intentionally placed them in some kind of stationary position, okay? Ideally, I want to recall the dog while they're actively doing something. So if in this case, if I have the dog on a 30-foot leash and I'm at the park and the dog has good prey drive, I would let the dog chase the squirrels. When I'm ready to call them, make sure that I have this leash in my hand, ready to go, and then issue the recall command, start tapping on the collar and moving away to draw them to me. Okay, so I'm using that distraction as something to get their attention, and I'm calling them from that. The dog returns to me, I can give some praise. I like to wait a moment because sometimes the dogs will prematurely leave. If that were to happen, we would start tapping. We would not issue the come command. We would simply start tapping, moving back and reeling in the leash to return them back towards us. And then once the dog has arrived, again, waiting a little bit, seeing if they prematurely break. If not, I can issue the word break and let the dog go back to chase the squirrels, or I can issue a heel and then walk to a different part of the park, okay? So if your dog is playing, let's say with another dog, you can practice recall with the long leash. I don't recommend having your dog play with more than two dogs while trying to practice your recall because your dog will need the long leash to be dragging in the beginning. And when there's more than a couple of dogs, especially with a 30-foot leash, the dogs tend to get tangled up, okay? So I want to be very careful with that. But that would also be a great way to practice your come when called, is allowing your dog to play, and then while they're actively playing, issuing your come command. Again, you want to make sure you can let it drag, be on the ground while your dog is playing and having fun, and then when you're ready to issue that recall, you simply grab the leash, get ready, call your dog, start tapping, moving back to pull them away from the play, praise them, wait a moment, break, and then let them go back to the playing again, okay? So anything that would get your dog's attention and keep them distracted, you can practice with. We do want to be careful not to drill the recalls too much, because if you do so, the dog will not want to leave your side. So recall is fairly finicky in that way. I had a client who I trained her first dog, and then she came back and I trained her second dog, and she told me that her first dog took 6 months before she considered her to be off-leash reliable. This just kind of gives you an idea, okay? Here at the facility, when we do our board and trains, we know we practice everything quite a bit. However, we are in a controlled context. This is not realistic. We're really just setting the foundation. You have to take this and then apply it in the context that would pertain to you. So if your dog goes to the dog park, you know, at some point you want to transfer your training there. Ideally when you're past the long leash phase, so that we're not getting dogs tangled up in the leash. If your dog has prey drive and there's a park with a lot of squirrels nearby, you can practice there. If your dog has a buddy and they have a yard, and you can practice there. You know, everybody's situation is different, but definitely want to practice our recalls when the dog is actively engaged with something, not when they're just sitting there doing nothing, okay? Typically when a person recalls their dog, the dog is chasing something, running away, or running towards something they shouldn't. For example, the street, that's almost always going to be an away motion. So I like to practice my recalls when the dog is either moving away from me and or is actively distracted by something, okay? So when it comes to practicing the recall on your own, you might go to the park for 30 minutes, but only get 2 opportunities to issue the come command to practice the recall. Because if you go to the park and try to drill it similar to how we drilled it in the videos, your dog's going to become paranoid. They're not going to want to leave your side. And this is why recall takes so long to actually teach, because when we do the training ourselves, you know, I have another handler step in who holds the dog so that we're able to do the reps to layer in the foundation and condition a dog. When you feel this, it means to come to me. But that's unrealistic. In the future, like, you know, no one's going to be holding your dog for you. They're going to be actively doing something. So we only do this in the very beginning when we're filming the foundational stuff for you to review. But realistically speaking, when we're doing the training ourselves, we're allowing the dog freedom and then looking for our opportunities to issue that recall command. Okay, so feel free to pair in food here if you'd like. You don't want to use the food as a lure. You're simply using the food as a reward, as a payment. So if I issue a come command and the dog leaves the squirrels and runs to me, they do a good recall, I can reward that, okay, to motivate that behavior, because recall, of course, is one of the most important behaviors a dog can learn. Some important things to note are when we're doing the recall, we want to make sure that we are always moving away from the dog. The away motion gives the dog something to attach to. Typically when people recall their dogs, they're stationary. So you get your dog's attention, you know, they're off playing, you call them, they look at you, you're stationary, they go, that's boring, I'm going to continue to play, okay? So you want to make sure that when you recall your dog, you are doing a very pronounced steps, nice big movements back like so. We don't want to take little bitty steps like this. It's going to be hard for your dog to see. Nice big steps, just be careful not to of your surroundings so you don't trip over a tree root or something. So the movement back gives your dog something to attach to. And we always want to make sure that we're facing our dog and not moving away from our dog like this, okay? Reason being is if we're at the park and there are other distractions, I train out of Oz Park a lot with clients, and I've seen it happen so many times where an owner will leave the dog playgroup that they have there, call their dog, see the dog start to come, assume the dog is going to return and start walking away, and then the dog goes back to playing. The dog gets distracted by a squirrel that they see on the return to the owner. So I want to make sure I have a visual on my dog until they are here, okay? I don't care where a dog lands, left, right, front, back, or between my legs. I just care that they're within my immediate space. So within an arm's length reach. So if the dog lands, for example, where this black spot is here, if I had to step like this to get the dog, I would consider that too far, okay? I want the dog to be within an immediate arm's length reach, because typically when we recall our dog, we're wanting to leash up our dog and leave the environment, okay? So having them be that close to you is very important. So if your dog happens to come to you but then stop a little bit short, we wouldn't step to the dog to get them. Instead, I would turn to face the dog, start tapping, and move backwards and away to draw them to me, okay? So making them complete the task 100%. By doing it this way, much less likely that we get bypasses. Bypasses being when the dog is coming towards you and they just run right past you. Unlikely that the dog will return and then just prematurely take off because you were very strict about, I need you to be here. And if you're using the remote collar, as you're tightening up the recall, the dog is thinking, well, I want less of that, so I'm not going to prematurely break. I'm going to make sure to always return to you as close as possible, okay? In cases where we have, if you're wanting a very specific location, if you want your dog to target the left side, for example, we would want to use food there, so when the dog is coming towards us, I can have my hand down for the dog to target, so they always land at the left side, or if they land to the front, same concept here. We would have our food always ready here, so the dog is at our front. In time, through repetition, your dog will start to favor these positions. So we're always moving away from our dog. We never want to repeat the command. So if the dog is coming to you and they mess up and let's say they take off that way, you would turn to face your dog, start tapping and moving back and away again to lead them back towards you. If they come back to you and then they go past that way, I turn to face the dog, start tapping and move back the opposite way. Sometimes we get what we call fanning. Fanning is when the dog is running a circle around you and not really running to you. If that's the case, you would want to keep the front of your body facing the dog and you're tapping and slowly just reeling in the leash, kind of little by little, pulling them towards you. And at some point, you'll see your dog make a direct line shot towards you, and then you just continue moving back until they complete the recall, okay? Very important at this stage in your training, every time you call your dog, you will always tap at least once, regardless of what your dog does. So if you say come, and your dog is coming towards you, you will tap them anyways, despite the fact that they responded to the command, okay? In training, we have what we call training and proofing. Training is shaping the behavior. So in the video that I'll cut to with your dog doing the reps, that's us training the behavior. Proofing is working the behavior in a number of different environments at all the different levels that there are here, to make sure that no matter where we apply the remote, the dog knows when I feel this, I need to just return to my owner. So at some point, you're going to mess up and remote your dog at the wrong time and or remote your dog at a high level. And what you'll most likely see is it's going to stop and or make your dog run away. Okay, so right now, while we're on the long leash, we want to make sure that we work through this problem while we're on the long leash so that we don't risk the dog running away. Okay, so if every time you call your dog, you always press the button, regardless of what they do, we're much more likely to create that mistake of confusing the dog or panicking the dog, which then allows us to work them through it to correct the behavior to proof our recall. Okay, so if I mistap a dog at too high of a number and they start to run away, I would keep the number where it's at, continue tapping, and then use my long leash and moving backwards to redirect the dog towards me. The reason we would not go lower is because the dog is running away from too much pressure, okay, which is not good, obviously. But in an emergency situation, for example, if your dog is running away from a firework because they're spooked, you're most likely going to have to use a very high level of pressure, if not the max, which is 127 on here. I've had this happen to clients, and almost always they're at 127 to override the dog's fear flight response to return them back towards you. Okay, so in doing this, if we go down lower, your dog's going to bypass it because they're panicking because of too much pressure. So we actually have to teach them how to take the high level of pressure and work through it and ultimately return to you. Okay, and this is what I would call like the final stage of proofing. The last thing with the recall when it comes to proofing is once you feel your dog is solid, you feel like your dog is reliable with the recall, I suggest going out to the park, putting your dog on a long 30-foot leash, maxing out your collar, letting your dog be a dog, holding the handle for when you're ready to issue the recall or to do the proofing exercise, and then randomly, with no words, no warning, no heads up, you're going to tap your dog repeatedly at 127 a few times. Tap, 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 for example. Or you can do a couple of quick taps of the continuous, which is the highest level of pressure that there is. What's most likely going to happen is your dog is going to freak out, okay? And then they will do one of two things. They're going to freak out, but then immediately run towards you, or they're going to freak out and they're going to try to run away, okay? So if the dog freaks out and runs towards you, you move back, you praise, you clap, good boy, good girl, praise them when they get here, and then act like nothing happened. If your dog freaks out and tries to run away, you would need to work your dog at that 127, okay? It's going to suck for you, it's going to suck for the dog, but the reason why I suggest this is because if you're in an emergency setting where the dog is running away out of fear or anything like that, you are most likely going to be at that 127 setting to override the situation to return your dog. So if you do it in a controlled setting, you yourself are exposing yourself to the stress of the situation because you know it's going to happen. You're also exposing your dog to the situation so that should you get caught in a real life moment where your dog is running away from you due to fear of flight, we're going to be okay because you've already done this before, okay, as opposed to trying to figure it out real time. So that concludes the recall explanation.